of several decades, in fact almost a century after where we left off in our previous class. We are going to be looking at C. Wright Mill's book called The Sociological Imagination, and the reason that I am kind of putting it up front here is because I think the book gives a very good sense of what we are trying to do in this course. We will go back to that same timeline when we go look at the classical sociologists. But today let us move to the 1930s, 40s and 50s and a reading of the sociological imagination. I want to emphasize that the word imagination, the fact that he uses the word imagination for sociology, which is a social science, is critical. So pay attention to that sensibility which this text allows us to develop as a social scientist. So C. Wright Mills is writing in the 1940s and the 1950s, and I have up here a timeline that is showing what is happening in the United States, where he's a professor. He's a professor in Columbia University. Around the time that he's writing, there is a lot going on in American history, and I think that's central to his argument. And so I want to first present that. 1929 is the Wall Street crash, which unleashes the Great Depression, which starts off in the United States, but then it has its ripples around the world. 1933, a lot of programs are started that try to mitigate the impacts of the Great Depression, but at that time there is very high unemployment, and that in fact is one of the examples that Mills uses in his text. 1939, the Second World War begins. 45, the Second World War ends. And here is the period where he's situating his text. One of the things that he's arguing is that while the 1930s, which was a period of intense strife, where we see that people are very aware of the political implications and the effects of politics and larger historical social processes on their own lives. Whereas in the 1950s, he says we seem to have forgotten that. And so why is that so? What's this 1950s period that he's talking about? 1950s is the Great Depression is over. It is a time of economic boom in the United States. It is some of the things that I put up here. Obviously, there's a lot more going on, but I thought it was important to mention that this is around the time that penicillin gets recognized as a drug, and antibiotics come into regular use, and therefore it's a time of health and prosperity. It's also America is rebuilding, it's rebuilding. Europe is also rebuilding. There is a lot of construction activity. There is economic boom. The great highways of the United States are coming up. Suburbanization is becoming quite a process where home ownership becomes a central tenet of what it means to be an American. A more critical look at this will come in some of the other lectures. But for today, I think what is important for us to recognize that this is a period where somehow if somebody is failing at something, or if there is a setback, then it is considered to be an individual problem. It is considered to be that there might be a behavioral or a character issue. There might be a lack in the individual. The link between the individual and larger social structures seem to be somewhat disconnected in the kind of discourse that is prevalent around the time, because this is the time where the American dream, the idea of home ownership, of a house in the suburb, all of that is quite prominent. So, sociology is by that time a well-established discipline in the university. And a lot of very large-scale studies are happening, grand theories are being presented, but what Mills senses is a lack of commitment to sociology also as a politically aware and connected, historically connected discipline. There are two very strong strands of the way of doing sociology in the United States, especially that Mills is responding to. The first one he almost sarcastically refers to as grand theory. Grand theory is when sociologists try and explain the phenomena of social structures and by categorizing them, by complex hierarchies, categorizations. It's also referred to as structural functionalism, where structure of society it appears to be justified. The hierarchies appear to be justified as everybody playing their particular role in society. This strand of sociology is mostly associated with the sociologist Talcott Parsons, who was a very, very prominent sociologist, a professor in the United States, and a proponent of structural functionalism. And Mills is quoting directly from his text to show the obscure language and the abstracted kind of version of history and sociology, which he says is far removed from the reality of individuals. So that is one strand that he's critiquing. The other one he refers to as abstracted empiricism. And here he really comes down heavy on the large-scale surveys that have come to dominate this particular way of doing sociology. Now, it is important also to remember that C. Wright Mills himself studied the changes and the transformations in the middle classes in the United States in the decades surrounding the 1920s, 30s, 40s, 50s, and he sees the shift in the middle classes from, let's say, landed farmers and shopkeepers to more the managerial class. And he's, in fact, he's written a lot on the managerial elite and on bureaucracy. And he says that this kind of doing sociology is largely both bureaucratic in the way that it's done and serves bureaucratic and governmental interests without really making any fundamental change in the way that people actually experience the social world. So it's far removed from the meaning social processes have for individuals in society. So both of these ways of doing sociology are not quite what he wants students of sociology to pursue. So what is his way of understanding sociology? He says that, and here I want to read out, in fact, let me do that first. How he opens the book, The Social Imagination. His first chapter is titled The Promise, and he opens it with, I'll read out a couple of paragraphs here. He says, nowadays, men often feel that their private lives are a series of traps. They sense that within their everyday worlds, they cannot overcome their troubles, and in this feeling, they're quite correct. What ordinary men are directly aware of and what they try to do are bounded by private orbits in which they live. Their visions and their powers are limited to the close-up scenes of job, family, neighborhood. In other milieux, they move vicariously and remain spectators. And the more aware they become, however vaguely, of ambitions and of threats which transcend their immediate locales, the more trapped they seem to feel. Then in the next paragraph, so this is like the individual feeling trapped because the individual is moving around in a personal milieu where they don't know anything outside the small social relations of family and neighborhood. He says, underlying this sense of being trapped are seemingly impersonal changes in the very structure of continent-wide societies. The facts of contemporary history are also facts about the successes and failures of individual men and women. When a society is industrialized, a peasant becomes a worker, a feudal lord is liquidated or becomes a businessman. When classes rise or fall, a man is employed or unemployed. When the rate of investment goes up or down, a man takes heart or goes broke. And he goes on and on. The point he's trying to make here is that as sociologists and even as regular persons or citizens, one needs to be aware that individual biographies are deeply interconnected with world histories and the social structures that surround them. And so he writes, the sociological imagination enables us to grasp history and biography and the relations between the two within society. This is the task and its promise. So this is the promise that a sociological imagination holds for us. This I really wanted to get across to the class, because if this is something that we can develop through this course, then I would say the objective has been obtained. Now he also coins two other phrases. He says, what the sociological imagination enables us to do is see personal troubles and public issues as interconnected. And he takes three examples. He takes the example of unemployment that I actually had in the timeline also. You see 1933 is as one of the highest rates of unemployment in the United States. He takes unemployment, he takes war, which is also something that he has seen in this period, and then he takes marriage. He says that if in a population of 100,000, there is one person, not two people unemployed, then one might be able to argue that this is something at a personal level. You know, they might have a character flaw, there might be a behavioral issue, there might be lack of training, or whatever you may be. But if it is 20,000 people unemployed in a population of 100,000, then we need to look at larger structural issue. We need to look at historical shifts that have happened that have made such a situation come to the fore. We need to understand the political economy of that particular society, and so on. So we need to look at this relationship. During a war, he gives the example of a war. He says, at the personal level, one person might be thinking of how to escape it. One might be wondering how to profit from it. Another one might be thinking of how to use the military situation to rise up in rank. Whereas historically, how the war is impacting people in different ways is something that sociologists need to study. Similarly, in marriage, similarly to unemployment, here he says if it is 2 or 3 or 4 cases, then it can perhaps be seen as something that is more at an individual level. But once the numbers rise, then we really need to look at the changing meanings of marriage. We need to look at political economic pressures. We need to look at shifting societal structures, care networks, all of that. And therefore, you cannot lose out on understanding meaning, history, social, political, historic structures, and other historical processes together. So that's like the core of the argument that he's trying to make in his book, Sociological Imagination. Now, once you have grasped that this is the sociological imagination that I need to develop, what are the kinds of questions that sociologists try to attempt to answer. And here again, I want to read out from his book. This is from page 6. I have the quote up there also on the slide. These are the kinds of questions that sociologists and in fact a lot of social scientists attempt to answer. So the first kind of questions is, what is the structure of this particular society as a whole? What are its essential components and how are they related to one another? How does it differ from other varieties of social order? Within it, what is the meaning of any particular feature for its continuance and for its change? This line is critical because while how does it differ and what are its essential components are happening in, let's say, the grand theory kind of way of doing sociology, it is the question of meaning that is, he's arguing, absent from that way of doing sociology. Next, he's asking us to look at, where does this society stand in human history? What are the mechanics by which it is changing? What is its place within and its meaning for the development of humanity as a whole? How does any particular feature we are examining affect and how is it affected by the historical period in which it moves? And this period, what are its essential features? How does it differ from other periods? What are its characteristics, ways of history making? See how different scales of research here are being connected. This is a very spatial geographical question, and in the next class, in fact, I will take us through developing a spatial imagination, which is also one of my objectives in this course. The third set of questions he's asking is, what varieties of men and women now prevail in this society and this period? And by this he means, what are the kinds of thinking, what are the kinds of ways of being that are prevalent, and what varieties are coming to prevail? In what ways are they selected and formed, liberated and repressed, made sensitive and blunted? What kinds of human nature are revealed in the conduct and character we observed in society in this period? And what is the meaning for human nature of each and every feature of the society we are examining? So these are the kinds of questions he thinks social scientists should be grappling with, which deeply link history, biography, and society. So I want to end with this particular slide where he rejects both the grand theory way and the abstracted empiricism way of doing sociology, and he in fact wants us to develop what he calls the sociological imagination, which he argues is a quality of mind. He says the sociological imagination is the quality of mind that seems most dramatically to promise an understanding of the intimate realities of ourselves in connection with larger social realities. And he calls this way of working with the different scales of the intimate with the global, of the local with the world, of individual with history and society, he calls that intellectual craftsmanship. So I will end here, and in our next class, we will try to look at what it means to develop a spatial imagination. Thank you.